The Queen forbade human hands. Now her life depends on the one pair she feared most. The alarm started at 300 hours, and Elias Cordova knew immediately that someone was dying. He sat up on the narrow bunk in his cell, every instinct from 6 years of combat medicine screaming that those particular klaxons meant catastrophic trauma. The energy barrier hummed blue across the opening, casting shadows through the sterile white room that had been his home for 3 months. Outside in the corridor, boots pounded against metal decking. Voices shouted in the sharp, angular language he'd barely begun to understand. Then came the weapons fire. Elias pressed himself against the wall beside the barrier, watching the corridor through the translucent blue field. 2 guards sprinted past, their sleek plasma rifles raised. More shouting. A scream cut short. The lights flickered once, twice, then emergency red flooded the passageway. Silence followed, thick and wrong. He counted his heartbeats, 30, 60, 90. Something heavy scraped against the floor. A figure appeared, dragging itself along the wall with one hand, while the other pressed against a wound that leaked dark blood between gray fingers. Takara, the security chief who'd overseen his transfer from the prison transport to this flagship. She collapsed against the control panel beside his cell, her angular features twisted in pain. "You," she rasped in thickly accented English. "I need medical supplies," Elias said, already assessing the arterial spray pattern on her uniform. "Let me help you." "Not me," she coughed, blood flecking her lips. "The Queen?" Elias's stomach dropped. Takara's hand slapped against the panel. The barrier dissolved with a hiss. She thrust a plasma pistol toward him with shaking fingers. "All physicians dead, medical systems destroyed. You save her, or you die with us." He took the weapon, checked the charge automatically. 70%. His hands stayed steady, even as his mind raced through implications he didn't have time to process. "Where?" "Throne room. Go." Takara slumped sideways, her breathing shallow. "Security override active, 10 minutes before lockdown." Elias crouched beside her, fingers finding the pulse point below her jaw. Thready, fading. "I can't save you both," he said quietly. "Wasn't asking," her eyes fixed on his, clear despite the pain. "She was wrong about your kind. Prove it." "She died before he could answer." Elias closed her eyes with one hand and stood, the pistol heavy in his grip. The corridor stretched ahead, red lights pulsing across walls splattered with blood and plasma scoring. He moved fast, boots silent on the decking, every sense alert for threats. His mind cataloged the carnage automatically. 3 guards down, precise kill shots, ambush formation. Professional work. The throne room doors gaped open, torn from their tracks. He smelled smoke and something else, something sweet and wrong that his hindbrain identified as alien blood before his conscious mind caught up. Inside, the ceremonial chamber looked like a war zone. Bodies scattered across polished floors. The elegant tapestries that lined the walls hung in charred ribbons. And on the raised dais at the far end, slumped across a throne carved from dark metal, was Queen Ashara. 2 attendants crouched beside her, their hands fluttering uselessly. One saw him and hissed, baring sharp teeth. The other raised a blade. "She let me out," Elias said, holstering the pistol and raising his empty hands. "Takara, she's dead." "Human!" The one with the blade spat the word. Jessen, he remembered, the younger attendant who'd watched his trial with open hatred. "You did this!" "Look at me." He kept his voice level, professional. "Do I have any weapons discharge residue? Any blood that isn't from the corridor? I was locked in a cell." The other attendant, older, with silver marking her temples, studied him with narrowed eyes. Her gaze dropped to Ashara, to the growing pool of blood beneath the throne, then back to Elias. "Can you help her?" she asked. "Move." They hesitated. Jessen's blade didn't waver. "Now," Elias snapped, letting command crack through his voice, "or watch her die while you decide." The older attendant grabbed Jessen's arm and pulled her back. Elias took the steps 2 at a time, his focus narrowing to the figure before him. Ashara's skin had gone pale, the silver-gray tone fading toward white. Her elaborate robes were soaked with blood from a vicious wound that ran across her torso from right hip to left ribs. The edges looked burned, energy weapon at close range. Her breathing came quick and shallow, each exhale bubbling wet. Her eyes were closed, but her fingers twitched against the armrest. He knelt beside the throne, hands hovering over her body as he forced himself to see past who she was and focus on what she needed. The wound itself was bad, but survivable. The real problem was the purple discoloration spreading from the injury like veins of poison beneath her skin. "What did this?" he demanded. "Blade." The older attendant moved closer. "Ceremonial weapon from the gallery. The attackers used our own arms against us." "It's poisoned." Elias touched the skin beside the wound, feeling heat radiating outward. "Her circulation system is distributing it. I need medical supplies, antiseptic, sutures, anything." "The medical bay was destroyed. Everything's gone." "Then bring me what you can find. Clean water, alcohol, fabric for bandages, something to sterilize instruments." He was already stripping off his uniform jacket, folding it into a pad. "Move." They scattered. He pressed the jacket against the wound, applying pressure. Ashara's eyes snapped open. Silver irises found him, and her entire body went rigid. She tried to pull away, hands scrabbling weakly at the armrests. "Don't," she whispered, "don't touch." "Your Majesty." He kept his pressure steady, his voice calm. "I'm going to save your life. That means touching you. You can hate me for it later." "I forbade," she gasped as pain cut through the words. "No human hands." "Takara overrode that. She's dead. So are your physicians. So is everyone who knew how to operate your medical systems, which were sabotaged anyway." He met her eyes, refusing to look away. "Right now, I'm all you have." Something in her gaze shifted, not acceptance, not trust, but recognition of reality. "The poison," she managed. "I know. I can see it spreading. I've treated toxins before, just not your species." He glanced at the wound, calculating. "I need to slow your circulation, neutralize what I can, and get the damaged tissue sealed before you bleed out. In that order." The ship shuddered beneath them. Emergency lights strobed across the throne room. A mechanical voice echoed through hidden speakers, speaking in her language. Urgent, repetitive. Ashara's face went even paler. "What?" Elias demanded. "Navigation failure." Her words came with effort. "We're drifting into the Kara field. Impact in 6 hours." "Can anyone else authorize emergency protocols?" "Only me. Command codes, neural signature required." "Then I need you conscious and coherent for at least another hour." He increased the pressure on her wound as her eyes started to flutter closed. "Stay with me, Your Majesty. You can die after you save your ship." Her lips pulled back, showing teeth too sharp to be human. "Arrogant," she hissed. "Necessary," he corrected. The attendants returned with arms full of supplies. Bottles of grain alcohol, strips of fabric, a box of kitchen implements that would have to serve as surgical tools. Elias grabbed the alcohol, soaked a cloth, and looked at Ashara. "This is going to hurt," he said. He peeled back his jacket and poured alcohol directly into the wound. She screamed. Her scream faded into ragged breathing. Elias's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound's edges while Ashara's fingers dug into the throne's armrests hard enough to leave marks in the metal. Sweat beaded on her forehead, running down her temples in silver-gray rivulets. "Breathe through it," he said, probing the injury carefully. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." "I know how to breathe," she ground out between clenched teeth. "Then do it." He pulled back, studying the poison's progression. The purple veins had slowed, but not stopped. "The toxin is enzymatic, breaking down your circulatory walls from the inside. I need to create compression barriers to keep it localized." In human terms, tourniquets. He looked at the attendants. "Strips of cloth, 2 feet long, 10 of them, and boil water. I need sterile instruments." They moved without argument. Jessen's hatred had transformed into fear, her movements jerky as she tore fabric. The older attendant disappeared toward what he hoped was a galley. He turned back to Ashara, taking in the full extent of her injuries. Her ceremonial robes would have to come off. They were stiff with blood and restricting access. His hands went to the fastenings at her shoulder. She caught his wrist. Her grip was weak but insistent. "Don't," she said. "I can't work through armor and fabric." "A human's hands on my skin." Her voice carried decades of loathing. "I swore never again." The words hung between them. Elias kept his eyes on hers. his expression neutral despite the implications burning through his mind. "I'm a medic," he said quietly. "Right now, that's all I am." "You don't understand what you're asking." "I understand you're dying." He didn't pull away from her grip. "And I understand your crew didn't die so you could cling to pride." Her fingers trembled against his wrist. Then her hand fell away. "Do it quickly," she whispered. He worked the fastenings loose with careful fingers, peeling away the outer layer. Beneath was a fitted undergarment, also soaked through. The wound traced diagonally across her abdomen, crossing just below her ribs. To treat it properly, he'd need full access. "The rest," he said. She closed her eyes and nodded once. The fabric clung where blood had dried. He used water to loosen it, each touch deliberate and professional. Her bone structure was elegant, narrower through the shoulders than human, but with denser muscle definition. The wound looked worse exposed. Ragged edges where the energy blade had cauterized as it cut, surrounding tissue mottled with poison. He placed the first tourniquet above the wound, tightening until she gasped. The purple veins darkened immediately as blood flow restricted. "Talk to me," he said, positioning the second tourniquet. "Keep your mind active. Tell me about this ship." "Why?" The word came through gritted teeth. "Because you need to stay conscious." He tied off the third tourniquet. "And because I've been locked in a cell for 3 months with nothing but my thoughts." Perhaps that was the kindest punishment. Was it punishment? He met her eyes as his hands worked across her skin, placing compression points along the poison's path. Or protection? Both. She watched his hands with something between revulsion and reluctant fascination. "You are the first human aboard since the Treaty of Kessler Station." "Because you banned them." "Because your kind cannot be trusted." His hands paused. "We're having this conversation while I'm saving your life." One exception does not erase history. Neither does one bad experience erase an entire species. He resumed working, tracking the poison's spread. "What happened to you?" "I don't discuss." She broke off with a sharp intake of breath as he applied pressure to damaged tissue. "Sorry, this part is necessary." He didn't look at her face, giving her privacy for the pain. "You don't have to tell me, but Takara said you were wrong about humans." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the ship's groaning and distant alarms. He positioned 2 more tourniquets, his fingers tracing the lines of her anatomy with careful precision. "Kyros Colony," Ashara finally said, 5 years ago, before the treaty. Elias knew the name. Every human soldier knew it. "The raid," he said quietly. "Your forces wanted our supply depot. They got it." Her voice had gone flat. "Along with 3,000 civilians, I was there negotiating refugee placement. When your people arrived, they didn't discriminate between combatants and council members." "I'm sorry. Your platitudes mean nothing." "They're not platitudes." He began cleaning the wound's interior, movements gentle despite his words. "I lost my daughter at Kyros. She was part of the civilian advisory team your forces were hosting. 8 years old." Ashara's eyes opened, finding his face. "The human delegation," she whispered. "We tried to protect them when the attack started. Most didn't survive." "Emma didn't." He kept working, kept breathing. "Neither did my wife. By the time I got the news, there wasn't even enough left to bury." "Then why volunteer for this assignment?" "Because someone has to stop it from happening again." He extracted a blade fragment from deep in the wound. "And because hating you won't bring them back." The ship lurched violently. Ashara cried out as the motion tore at her injuries. Elias caught her shoulders, steadying her. "The asteroid field," she gasped. "We're entering the outer edge." "Can you walk?" "I can barely breathe." "That's not what I asked." He assessed her condition. The poison was contained but not eliminated. She'd need surgery, but she could potentially move. "Where's the emergency override?" 3 levels up." "Can you authorize from anywhere else?" "No, neural interface requires direct connection." She tried to push herself upright and failed. "Even if I could walk, the route crosses the central atrium. If the attackers are still aboard." "They are." He began wrapping her torso with clean bandages. This wasn't random. Someone planned this carefully, killed specific people, destroyed specific systems. Why leave us drifting? Maybe they wanted it to look like an accident. He helped her back into her robes, covering the bandages. She didn't protest his touch this time. Or maybe they're waiting for you to die before they complete their mission. When he was finished, she looked almost composed, if one ignored her pallor and the way she swayed. "I need you to stand," he said. "Yes, you can." He moved beside her, positioning himself to take her weight. "I've seen soldiers with worse injuries walk 5 miles. You're going 3 corridors. I can't feel anything below my hip. Then I'll be your leg." He slid his arm around her waist, feeling her stiffen. "We don't have time for pride. Lean on me." For a long moment she didn't move. Then she shifted her weight against him. He took it easily, muscle memory from hundreds of battlefield evacuations guiding his movements. He stood slowly, bringing her up with him. She made a sound, pain or protest. Her hand clutched his shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. They stood pressed together, her body trembling, his arms supporting most of her weight. "Now walk," he said quietly. They took one step, then another, her breathing harsh against his ear, her weight growing heavier with each movement. The attendants hovered nearby. "Show us the fastest route," Elias ordered, "and bring weapons." They entered the corridor and the real work began. The command deck might as well have been on another ship. Every 20 steps, Ashara's strength failed and they had to stop. Elias braced her against the wall while she gathered herself, her chest heaving with the effort of simply staying conscious. The poison had been contained, but its damage spread through her system like cracks in glass. "Keep moving," he urged as her eyes started to close. "Talk to me. Tell me about your ship." "Flagship Valence," she managed. "Commissioned 12 years ago, crew complement of 400. "How many survived the attack?" "I don't know." Her hand tightened on his shoulder as they started forward again. The attendant said most of the command staff was in the throne room for the ceremony. That's why the casualties were so concentrated. "What ceremony?" "The rites of continuation, renewing my oath to serve." Her words came between labored breaths. "It happens every solar cycle. All senior officers present. Perfect opportunity for—" She stumbled. He caught her before she could fall, taking her full weight against his chest. Her head dropped to his shoulder, silver hair spilling across his arm. "Stay with me," he said. "How much farther?" Jezin, scouting ahead, turned back with fear written across her features. "The central atrium is blocked, blast doors sealed. Can we override them?" "Only from the command deck." Elias looked at Ashara. Her breathing had gone shallow, skin pale as frost. They didn't have time for detours. "Maintenance shafts," Ashara whispered against his shoulder. "There's a crawlspace network, emergency access." "Can you climb?" "No," she lifted her head with visible effort. "But you can. Take the emergency codes. Leave me here." "Not happening." "I'm slowing you down. The ship needs its queen." He adjusted his grip, lifting more of her weight. "And I need you conscious to input those codes. So we do this together or not at all." Something flickered in her silver eyes, not gratitude. She'd never give him that, but perhaps a glimmer of respect. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough for one person. Elias went first, half carrying Ashara behind him as they crawled through the narrow passage. The metal was cold against his hands, and he felt her trembling with each movement. Her injured side dragged uselessly, forcing him to bear almost all her weight. He didn't stop moving, but his hands tensed on the metal. "Your interrogators wanted intelligence about our fleet positions, supply routes, defense protocols." Her breathing rasped against his back. They were very creative in their methods. "You asked why I fear human hands, now you know." They reached a vertical shaft. Elias looked up at the ladder, then back at her. She could barely support herself on level ground. Climbing was out of the question. "Hold on to me," he said. "What?" "Wrap your arms around my neck. Lock your legs around my waist. I'll climb for both of us." "That's madness." "It's necessity." He positioned himself in front of her. "Unless you have a better idea in the next 10 seconds. She didn't. With movements that spoke of agony, she pressed herself against his back, arms circling his neck, her legs wrapped around his waist, the position intimate despite their circumstances. He felt every tremor that ran through her body, every catch in her breath. "If you drop me," she murmured against his ear, "I'll haunt you. If I drop you, we're both dead anyway." He started climbing. Each rung was a battle. Her weight threw off his center of gravity, forcing him to compensate with core strength alone. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His shoulders screamed. But he kept moving, one hand over the other, while Ashara clung to him with whatever strength she had left. "I never thanked them for rescuing me," she said quietly. "My forces. By the time they found me, I couldn't speak, couldn't stand anyone's touch. It took months before I could tolerate even medical examinations. I'm sorry that happened to you." Your people did it." "My people also died at Kyros. My daughter was 8 years old and she burned alive because someone decided civilians were acceptable casualties." His voice stayed level through sheer will. "I don't excuse what was done to you, but I won't carry guilt for crimes I didn't commit." They reached the top of the shaft. He pulled them both through, then collapsed against the wall, with Ashara still pressed against him. For several moments, they simply breathed, her face buried in his neck, his arms wrapped around her to keep her from sliding down. "We should keep moving," she finally said, but didn't move. "Give it a minute, I'm not superhuman. Could have fooled me." She pulled back slightly, and their faces were suddenly very close. Her silver eyes studied him with an intensity that had nothing to do with injury or pain. "Why did you really volunteer for this assignment?" "I told you the truth, Elias, not the diplomatic answer." He met her gaze without flinching. "Because I wanted to understand you. All of you. I wanted to see if the people who killed my family were monsters, or if they were just people making terrible choices in an impossible situation." He reached up, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her face without thinking. "I needed to know if peace was possible, or if we're all just doomed to keep killing each other until nothing's left." "And what have you learned?" "That you're not monsters, you're just scared." His hand lingered against her cheek. "Same as us." The ship shuddered again, more violently than before. Emergency klaxons blared a new pattern. Urgent, escalating. "Impact warning," Ashara translated. "We have less than an hour." He helped her to her feet, and they staggered toward the command deck entrance. The doors opened at Ashara's approach, revealing a space of elegant chaos. Control stations arranged in a circle around a central command platform, holographic displays flickering with warning messages. "The neural interface," Ashara said, gesturing toward a throne-like chair in the center. "Help me there." They crossed the deck together. She sank into the chair with a sound of relief, and silver tendrils emerged from the headrest, reaching toward her temples. "Wait," Elias said, something nagging at his combat-honed instincts. "Let me check it first." "There's no time." He was already examining the interface connections, looking for anything out of place. And there, nearly invisible against the silver metal, was a hair-thin wire that didn't belong. "Don't touch it," he said sharply. He traced the wire with careful fingers, following it down into the chair's base. His stomach dropped when he saw where it led, directly into the neural feedback circuits. If Ashara had connected, the surge would have burned out her brainstem instantly. "Someone sabotaged the command chair," he said, his voice cold. "This whole thing was designed to get you here, to finish what the assassination started." Ashara stared at the interface, her face draining of what little color remained. "Then how do I stop the ship?" "Manual override. There has to be a backup system." "There is, but it requires neural calibration from a functioning interface first. Without that, the manual controls are locked out." She slumped in the chair, exhaustion and poison finally overwhelming her. "We're dead. Everyone aboard is dead." "No." Elias's mind raced through possibilities, discarding and reforming plans in the span of heartbeats. "The poison in your wound. You said it was enzymatic, breaking down cellular walls." "Yes, what does—" "The sabotage was planned before the attack, which means whoever did this is still aboard, watching, waiting." He turned to face her fully. "They need to know the job is finished. They need to see you fail." Understanding dawned in her eyes. You want to make them reveal themselves, and I want them to think they've won. He pulled her from the chair supporting her weight, which means we need to disappear, now. The observation deck was dark, powered down like most non-essential sections. Elias guided Ashara through the entrance and sealed the door behind them, engaging manual locks. Through the panoramic windows, asteroids drifted past in silent menace, some close enough to scrape the hull with sounds like distant thunder. Sit, he said, easing her down against the wall. She obeyed without protest, which told him more about her condition than any medical scan. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, veins standing out in dark relief. The bandages around her torso showed fresh blood seeping through. The stitches tore when we climbed, he said, kneeling beside her. I need to reseal the wound. With what? We left everything behind. He pulled a plasma cutter from his belt, one of the tools he'd grabbed from a maintenance locker. Her eyes widened. You can't be serious. It's sterile. The heat will cauterize cleanly. He tested the power setting, adjusting it to the lowest functional level. And it's all we have. I'll scream. I know. He pulled a strip of fabric from his pocket. Bite down on this. She took it with shaking hands, their fingers brushing. Even now, even dying, she flinched at the contact. But she didn't pull away. She folded the fabric and placed it between her teeth, then met his eyes with a look that was equal parts trust and terror. He worked quickly, peeling back her robes and the blood-soaked bandages. The wound had reopened along 3 inches of the original cut. He activated the plasma cutter. The sound she made would haunt him, muffled by the fabric, but still raw with agony as he ran the superheated edge along the wound's length. Her hand shot out and tangled in his hair, pulling hard enough to make his eyes water. He kept his grip steady, sealing tissue layer by layer, while she writhed beneath his touch. When it was done, she spat out the fabric and dragged air into her lungs in great shuddering gasps. Her hand was still in his hair, fingers twisted tight. Neither of them moved to break the contact. I hate you, she whispered. I know. I hate that you're competent. I hate that you're kind. I hate that every time you touch me, part of me stops remembering why I should be afraid. He turned his head slightly, and her fingers loosened in his hair, sliding down to cup his jaw. The gesture was unconscious, seeking comfort from the only source available. You should be afraid, he said quietly, not of me, but of what's happening between us. Nothing is happening. Liar. Her thumb traced across his cheekbone, and he saw the moment she realized what she was doing. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she drew him closer, until their foreheads pressed together and their breaths mingled. This is madness, she said. Probably. When this is over, if we survive, you'll order me back to my cell and pretend this never happened. Yes, but her hand tightened on his face, belying the word. The ship lurched sideways. An asteroid the size of a small moon filled the viewport, rotating slowly as they drifted past it. Too close. They'd missed collision by mere meters. We're running out of time, Ashara said, pulling back from him. Even if we identify the saboteur, I still can't access the command systems. Then we need to force them to undo what they've done. Elias sat back on his heels. They're watching the ship's status, waiting for impact or confirmation of your death. What happens to command authority if you die? It transfers to my second officer, Salvorn. Where was he during the attack? Off ship. He was overseeing a supply transfer to the... She stopped, her eyes widening. He was supposed to be off ship. But the supply transfer was scheduled for tomorrow. I remember because he requested the schedule change last week. Her breathing quickened. He said it was a logistical necessity. He made sure he wouldn't be here during the attack, but close enough to return and take command. Elias stood, pacing to the viewport. If you die now, he becomes ranking officer. He can blame the assassination on human extremists, take control of the fleet, and restart the war. Salvorn has served for 15 years. Or he's been planning this for 15 years. He turned back to her. Who else could access the command systems to install that sabotage? Who else knew your schedule well enough to plan the attack during a ceremony? Who else benefits from your death? She wanted to deny it. He could see the resistance in every line of her body. Salvorn was more than her officer. He was her friend, her trusted advisor. "How do we prove it?" she finally asked. "We make him think he's won, then we watch what he does next. He'll have allies. He couldn't have killed everyone alone. Then we identify them too." Elias moved back to her side, helping her to her feet. "But first, we need somewhere safer. This observation deck is too exposed." They made it halfway to the door before it exploded inward. 3 figures in tactical armor stormed through, weapons raised. Elias recognized the lead soldier, Renvik, one of Ashara's guards. "Step away from the Queen," Renvik ordered, his plasma rifle trained on Elias's chest. "Renvik, stand down," Ashara commanded, her voice carrying royal authority despite her weakness. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but Commander Salvorn's orders are clear. The human is to be eliminated, and you're to be taken to medical treatment." Treatment from the same people who sabotaged the command deck. Renvik's weapon didn't waver. "Commander Salvorn saved your life by ordering the human released. But now the human has clearly taken you hostage. I have my orders." "Your orders are based on lies," Elias said calmly, calculating angles and distances. 3 armed soldiers, 1 half-dead queen, and him with nothing but a plasma cutter. Salvorn orchestrated the assassination. Convenient accusation from a human terrorist. "If I wanted her dead, she'd be dead. I've had dozens of opportunities." He shifted his weight, angling himself between the soldiers and Ashara. "I'm also the only reason she's still breathing." "Move aside, final warning." Elias saw the soldier's finger tighten on the trigger and moved. He threw himself sideways, pulling Ashara down with him as plasma fire scorched the air where they'd been standing. They hit the deck hard, and Ashara's cry of pain cut through him. He rolled, putting his body between her and incoming fire, and activated the plasma cutter in his hand. He hurled it at the nearest soldier's weapon, and the 2 energy sources connected in a burst of feedback that sent the soldier stumbling backward. 2 rifles still active, no cover, no escape. Then Ashara's hand touched his shoulder, and she whispered something in her own language. The observation deck's emergency systems activated, fire suppression, pressure alerts, containment fields. The soldiers were suddenly battling automated systems. "Voice authorization," she gasped. "Limited functions only, but enough." He didn't waste the opportunity. He lunged forward while the soldiers were distracted. A strike to the knee joint, collapsing the first soldier. A grab for the falling rifle, spinning to fire at the second. The third, Renvik, managed a shot that grazed Elias's shoulder, but he didn't stop moving. He closed the distance and put Renvik down with the rifle stock to his helmet. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and the groan of the hull. Elias turned back to Ashara. She'd propped herself against the wall, one hand pressed to her side where fresh blood stained the bandages. "You're hurt," she said, looking at his shoulder. "Barely a scratch." He moved to her side, checking her injuries. The cauterization had held, but the impact had done new damage. "We need to move. Salvorn knows we're alive now." "Then let him come." She looked up at him, silver eyes blazing despite her pain. "I'm done running in my own ship." "You can barely stand." "Then you'll have to carry me." She held out her hand. "Because we're ending this. Now." He took her hand and pulled her to her feet, and together they turned toward the door. They found Salvorn in the secondary control room, exactly where Elias predicted he'd be. Close enough to monitor the ship's systems, but far enough from the sabotaged command deck to maintain plausible deniability. He wasn't alone. 6 armed guards surrounded him, their weapons trained on the door as Elias and Ashara entered. The rifle Elias had taken from Renvik was spent, discarded 2 corridors back. He supported Ashara with one arm, the other hanging ready at his side. Salvorn turned from the control console, his angular features arranged in an expression of carefully crafted concern. He was tall even for their species, with silver markings along his jaw that denoted high rank. "Your Majesty," he said, moving toward them, "thank the ancestors you're alive. I've been coordinating rescue efforts since you orchestrated my assassination." Ashara's voice cut like a blade despite her weakness. Salvorn stopped. For just a moment his mask slipped, and Elias saw cold calculation beneath the concern. "I don't understand," Salvorn said carefully. The human has clearly... The human saved my life. She pulled away from Elias, standing unsupported through sheer force of will. While you ensured you were conveniently off-ship during an attack you scheduled, while your people sabotaged the command interface, while you waited for confirmation of my death so you could take control. These are serious accusations based on what? The word of a prisoner? Salvorn's hand moved toward his sidearm. Your Majesty, you're injured and clearly not thinking clearly. Let my men escort you to medical. Your men just tried to kill us both in the observation deck. Salvorn's eyes flickered to Elias, reassessing. The guards shifted, weapons adjusting angles. I gave orders to rescue you from the human, Salvorn said. If they acted overzealously, they acted on your orders to eliminate witnesses. Elias stepped forward, drawing attention to himself and away from Ashara. You needed the Queen dead and someone to blame. Human extremists would have been perfect. Restart the war, take control of the fleet, position yourself as the strong leader who would avenge her. Paranoid human logic, but Salvorn's hand was now on his weapon. Guards, restrain them both. The guards moved forward. Ashara raised her hand, and her voice rang out with royal command. Anyone who follows that order is committing treason. Stand down. 3 guards hesitated, 3 didn't. The room erupted into chaos. Elias moved on pure combat instinct, using Ashara's moment of distraction to close the distance to the nearest guard. He caught the rifle barrel, redirecting the shot into the ceiling, and drove his elbow into the guard's throat. The soldier went down choking. Ashara was fighting too. Her movements weakened, but precise. She'd grabbed a fallen guard's weapon and was using it more as a club than a firearm, her injured side limiting her range. One of the loyal guards had turned on his fellows, evening the odds. Salvorn fired. The shot was meant for Ashara. Elias saw it coming, saw the angle, the trajectory, the inevitability of it. He threw himself in front of her, taking the plasma bolt in his side. Pain exploded through him, white-hot and all-consuming. He went down hard. Elias! Ashara's voice, raw with something that sounded like fear. Through the haze of pain, he saw her standing over him, the rifle in her hands now firing with deadly accuracy. She dropped 2 guards in rapid succession, her movements almost mechanical in their efficiency. The loyal guard took down another. The odds had shifted. Salvorn ran? Stay down, Ashara commanded, her hand touching Elias's shoulder briefly before she pursued. He tried to stand anyway. His leg buckled. The world tilted sideways, and he realized with clinical detachment that the plasma bolt had done more damage than he'd thought. Internal bleeding, probably. Maybe organ damage. He'd seen enough field injuries to know how this played out. He dragged himself upright using a console for support and staggered after her. The corridor was a blur of pain and determination. He followed the sound of weapons fire, each step an exercise in willpower. When he reached the maintenance junction, he found Ashara and Salvorn locked in close combat, their struggle vicious and desperate. Salvorn had training, reach, and full strength. Ashara had rage, determination, and nothing left to lose. They were evenly matched in their damage, both wounded, both running on fumes. Elias raised the pistol he'd taken from the fallen guard. His hands shook. The shot would be nearly impossible in his condition. Ashara down, he shouted. She dropped without hesitation, absolute trust in her movement. Elias fired. The shot took Salvorn in the shoulder, spinning him around. The commander staggered, his weapon clattering across the floor. Ashara was on him before he could recover, her fist connecting with his jaw in a strike that carried months of betrayal behind it. Salvorn went down and stayed down. She stood over him, chest heaving, blood seeping through her bandages. Then she turned and saw Elias leaning against the wall, his own blood pooling beneath him. "You idiot," she said, crossing to him in 3 quick strides. "You absolute idiot." Seemed like a good idea at the time. Her hands were on his face, his chest, trying to assess the damage, while her own injuries threatened to pull her under. "Why did you do that?" Her voice broke on the words. "Same reason you didn't let them shoot me." He smiled despite the pain. "Turns out I'm invested in your survival." "This isn't funny." "Not trying to be funny, trying to stay conscious." His knees buckled, and she caught him, lowering them both to the floor. They ended up in a tangle of limbs, her supporting him while he bled out in her arms. The command systems, he managed. Salvorn's console, he had to disable the sabotage to access them himself. Understanding lit her eyes. She looked between him and the secondary control room, clearly calculating if she had time for both. "Go," he said. "Save the ship." "Not without you. I'll still be here when you're done. Probably." He pressed his hand to the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. "But if you don't stop this ship from hitting those asteroids, we're all dead anyway." She hesitated one more heartbeat, then pressed her forehead to his in a gesture that spoke of promises neither of them might be able to keep. Then she was moving, dragging herself back to the control room while Elias focused on breathing. Time became elastic. He heard her voice giving commands, felt the ship shudder as thrusters fired. The view through the nearby viewport shifted, asteroids falling away, open space opening up before them. Then she was back, dropping beside him with a medical kit she'd found somewhere. "Hold still," she ordered, her hands already working on his injury with the same efficiency he'd shown treating hers. "Don't you dare die on me, Elias Cordova, not after everything." "Wouldn't dream of it, Your Majesty." Her hands trembled as she worked, but they were sure, competent. She'd watched him perform field medicine enough times to replicate the basics. The pain intensified as she cleaned and sealed the wound, but he welcomed it. Pain meant alive. When she was done, they sat together in the corridor, both wounded, both exhausted, both alive against all odds. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I was wrong about humans," she said quietly. "About you. You were scared. People make mistakes when they're scared." Some mistakes nearly cost everything. She looked at their joined hands, at the symbol of everything she'd forbidden for so long. "I'm revoking the ban, effective immediately. Humans will have full access to this fleet." "That's going to cause problems with your hardliners." "Let them complain." She lifted his hand to her lips, kissing his knuckles with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the violence they'd just survived. "I'm done being ruled by fear." 3 days later, Ashara stood before the assembled fleets, hers and humanity's, with Elias at her side. The scars from his surgery marked her skin beneath her formal robes. His own wound was still healing, bandaged under his dress uniform. She announced the conspiracy, the arrests, the evidence. She spoke of betrayal and survival and the unexpected bridges built in desperate circumstances. And then she announced that Elias Cordova would remain aboard her flagship as personal physician and diplomatic advisor. The objections came as expected. She silenced them with a look. Later, in her private chambers, she took his hands in hers and placed them over her heart, over the scars his surgery had left. "These marks prove I survived," she said. "They prove you're stronger than you think," he replied. "They prove I was wrong." Her thumb traced across his knuckles. "Sometimes the things we fear most are exactly what we need." He pulled her close, mindful of both their healing injuries, and kissed her. She melted into it, all her walls finally coming down, all her fear transformed into something else entirely. Outside the viewport, 2 fleets held position. No longer enemies, not quite allies, but something new, something with potential. Inside the chamber, a queen and a medic held each other, their hands intertwined, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal with the right touch.